Welcome to Footnotes, a behind-the-scenes look at what we value and why it matters here at Foothill Church in Glendora, California.
Hello, Footnotes peoples. It's a great day for a new podcast. My name is Stephen Koppenrath. I'm one of the pastors here at Foothill Church, and I'm your host. And today we're breaking some new ground with a bit of a pivot towards some pop culture chats. So we started our series in Exodus last year in 2020, and after a quick break, we're back at that sermon series on Sunday mornings. So I thought what we'd do is some kind of fun and invite Bryan and Ike in. What's up, guys?
Hey.
Hey.
Welcome.
Oh,
welcome.
hey, Bryan.
Hey, man.
So we all had an assignment to do to check out some of the different depictions of Exodus movies throughout movie history a little bit. So we are all three movie guys, I think. Some of us are a little bit nerdier about it than others, but we like to talk about that for sure.
Who do you think is the nerdiest one in here?
Probably you. Probably Bryan. Yeah, I feel like you know the most like technical terms as far as, right? I mean,
I've seen cameras.
you've
I've said microphone before, yeah.
I mean, you know what? Do you know what blocking is?
Kind of.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Maybe I'm the nerdiest one, right? So, although Ike has actually been in a movie before, so do you want to tell the quick story?
We were living in New Zealand, and they pretty much wanted anybody with an American accent possible. They were literally almost getting people off bus stops. Mm-hmm. And I got to be an extra in Avatar, James Cameron Avatar.
That's pretty cool.
And it was phenomenal.
Yeah.
I even got to talk to him one time. He was, and the thing was you wanted your accent to be heard, because if you got paid like $400 for the day,
right,
and like 5 meals, which is phenomenal. But if you got one line, it went to like $1,500 to $2,000. So it was like a monetary excitement.
Yeah.
So anyway, he came around. He's like, "Hey, has anybody seen Giovanni Ribisi?" I'm like, he went that way, because the other guys would have sound totally different. And
right.
So I got out. He's like, "Thanks, man." I'm like, "You got it."
Yes, James Cameron conversation. That's pretty cool. We'll actually have to timestamp where you are in that movie too, because you can actually see Ike in that scene.
Yeah.
So.
You're the blue guy, right?
Yeah, he's like the main blue guy.
Yeah.
Dude, I dehydrated myself for 2 days for that shirtless scene. It was
so stupid. All right, well let's
say 2 days, 2 months.
Let's start here. Obviously, Exodus happened in the past, but what's your favorite historical movie? Let's maybe just jump there for a minute.
Man, that was tough for me because I was going through all my favorite movies and I realized all the things I wanted to be true weren't real. I was like, Rocky, easily my favorite historical movie. No, not real. But I think probably Zodiac.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. I don't know, man.
It's like a serial killer one, right?
Don't read into that. Foothill Church. It's just really good. I don't know. I like the movie a lot.
I feel like I found
Downey
myself.
Jr. I felt seen.
I feel like I was really understood for the first time ever.
Well, it happened like in the backyard of my hometown, and it was Zodiac.
Yeah.
Two thumbs up. Yeah.
Wow. Okay, I wasn't expecting you to go there, but that's cool. Ike, how about you?
This may sound like a sellout, but probably it's Saving Private Ryan.
Yeah.
But there's some other movies you can say, because there's historical, like real historical, and there's like historical genre.
Yeah.
So, Saving Private Ryan, and also Ben-Hur.
Yeah.
That kind of feeds into what we're talking about today. But both those are just, I actually didn't see the new one, which is...
Yeah, it's not great.
I don't think you need to.
It's not great, yeah.
But yeah, Ben-Hur was awesome.
For sure.
Yeah. Saving Private Ryan, for sure.
I'm on the same page with you, man. Actually, Ben-Hur is one of my favorite movies as well.
Wow.
Charlton Heston is really good in that movie. And then also Braveheart. Braveheart's always kind of been, even though it's very unrealistic and like you mentioned, I think sword and sandal kind of genre, Gladiator, those kind of movies are awesome, but it's very much not based 100% in reality. But Braveheart.
What's your favorite scene in Braveheart?
Man, the rallying scenes are pretty awesome. I mean,
like his speeches, baby.
Yeah, Men of Scotland, like it's pretty cool. And I'm not Scottish or white for that matter, but it's still very exciting to see people get their independence. So each of us had a different kind of depiction of Exodus to watch. So Bryan, you watched?
I watched Prince of Egypt.
Prince of Egypt,
starring Val Kilmer.
Right,
the animation,
the DreamWorks one, right, from mid '90s or so.
97, I think. Yeah,
and then I watched
Exodus, God and Kings.
All right.
Gods and Kings with Christian Bale, that guy from Warrior.
Joel Edgerton. Yeah.
Joel Edgerton, yeah.
Cool.
We'll talk about it. Yeah, incredibly well acted, yeah. Ridley Scott made it.
Ridley Scott, another Gladiator I referenced there.
Yeah.
And then I watched The Ten Commandments, which is that old school 1950s, 3 hours and 40-minute long epic, which actually, it's funny, it was very long, and but it was really good. So it was totally worth it. Good payoff. Charlton Heston was Moses. Lots of things to talk about there. But Bryan, maybe start us off. You've had Prince of Egypt. Give us kind of a 1-minute overview of that movie a little bit.
Yeah. So it's an animation made by DreamWorks, same people who did Shrek. But what this is, it's a classic story of Moses, but it's told a little bit differently. So it's framed, instead of just like the story of this one guy going against a whole nation, it's kind of it's the story of two brothers. And so you have Moses with his brother Ramses, and Ramses is the rightful heir to the throne, the rightful Pharaoh, and then Moses is this adopted son who comes in, and the whole movie frames this as actually being really, really close brothers. They love each other. There's no hint of rivalry in there at all. But from the very beginning, you see a little bit of difference as to kind of what they hold most dear. Pharaoh, the dad, he holds Ramses to a higher standard. He keeps saying, hey, you are the morning and the evening star, which is something that they go back to over and over. It's kind of this idea that Pharaoh is God. And Ramses really holds on to that. He doesn't want to be the weak link that kind of ruins the whole nation, the whole kingdom. And Moses kind of very early on, he realizes that he is not part of this world. He's something completely different. The very first time he kind of meets his brother and his sister, it's by accident. And he realizes who he really is as a Hebrew, these slaves. And so they go on these different paths, if you know the story of Moses. But again, they tell the whole story through the frame of these two brothers who go completely different. Yeah. And there's just sort of like a love and a hurt there. But yeah, it's really great. So the classic story of Moses told through the framework of brotherhood.
Does that kind of theme of like that relationship carry throughout the whole movie? There,
the entire movie. Those are the two
Ramses
main
and
characters.
Moses. Yeah. Okay. Cool. Ike, how about you?
How's the song go, Brian?
Oh yeah, there's a song.
Which one? Well, there's the main theme. That's a good one.
That's like from Frozen 2, I think.
That's a banger.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure my dad ears just perked up. Yeah.
That's what we're talking about, right? Frozen 2, the story of Anna and Elsa, the two siblings.
There's some parallels there. Ike, tell us about your movie.
This was Exodus, Gods and Kings. This was basically the gritty, we're going to show you the high budget Gladiator meets Exodus. And it literally was Gladiator meets Exodus. If you think of the original Gladiator, you have Joaquin Phoenix, who's the emperor. That was kind of Ramses. He wasn't the chosen one. Like the dad has a scene, kind of like how in Gladiator, the emperor has a scene with Maximus saying, like, I wish you were kind of the one who could be lead. I wish I could give it to you. Exact same thing happens in this. They even stole the same line twice. He sleeps so well because he's loved. Joaquin Phoenix said in Gladiator. They said it twice in this movie. I think he just felt like people didn't hear it the first time, wanted to remake it. But it really was that. They also kind of do the brotherhood theme. However, you see early that Ramses kind of has this kind of chip on his shoulder. He knows he's not the favored one, and it kind of comes out quickly.
Right.
But yes, Feast for the Eyes, and there's a lot of great themes going on. But yeah, it really was Gladiator meets Exodus.
So these are kind of like two different movies on the opposite ends of the kind of family-friendly scale too, probably, right? I'm assuming like your movie is a little more violent. Bryan is for kids specifically. I mean for adults too, but.
Yeah, it's made for families for sure. But what I appreciate, I mean, they don't shy away from the dark elements. I mean, people straight up die. They talk about the mass genocide, and so it's a really mature, good family movie. Yeah, but there's no sliced throats or anything.
Yeah, this was still PG-13. So I think actually with parental supervision, you could have a teenager watch and talk about the themes.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Cool. Yeah. So my movie was The Ten Commandments. It came out in 1956. It was starring Yul Brennan as Ramses, and
is it Brenner or Brenner?
I'm sorry, Brenner. Yeah. Brenner. Thank you. Charlton Heston as Moses. And so what's cool about this movie is, well, first of all, I could tell that it was the kind of the starting point for a lot of probably your two movies, where like a lot of even the brother kind of relationship was probably based off of this movie to start with, because Ramses and Moses very much had that rivalry, and it was really interesting to see kind of them work that out between dad, who was Pharaoh, and Moses, this adopted son. Some of the things that popped out right away was even just in the intro credits, just the signs of the times even. It says that it was based off of like Josephus and the Holy Scriptures. So it was like very much like kind of made this assumption that everybody like, hey, we're all gonna know what that is and know like, hey, the Bible is true-ish, and so we're gonna base this movie off of that. Definitely talked a lot about this deliverer, kind of almost like Neo character, where like there's these like myths and legends about this deliverer who would come and kind of free the people from Egypt. So similar to what you guys are talking about, I don't think it deviates too much from the storyline. They do like focus a lot on different aspects. Like Joshua is actually in the movie throughout. He's this like stonecutter who is kind of like this this hero hotshot guy throughout the whole movie who kind of like comes in and out. There's a love interest with Joshua, and later on it makes more sense, I guess, why Joshua and Moses kind of like hand off the baton later on in life. Yeah, it was what was cool about it was the scale of the movie and it being from the 50s really put kind of that old Hollywood thing on display. So like there were like thousands of extras. These shots were not CGI. They were like all practical shots. And so when you see like even like these scenes where all the Hebrew slaves would be like building the pyramids or something, it would legitimately be like 5,000 people out there doing things.
Crazy. And
they would shoot this shot and be like, wow, this is a really epic movie. I mean, especially for the 50s.
We can imagine just the undertaking logistically to feed all those people,
yeah,
for them to hear
totally.
You say, okay,
yeah.
everybody stop, go back.
I like how food is the first place your mind goes.
Always.
Yeah.
You know this.
No, absolutely.
We all know this.
There's a scene where it takes a lot of coordination because like Joshua's running probably like 100 yards, like a football field kind of length, and he's running past thousands of people, and everybody's kind of doing things in the background. So yeah, I was really impressed from a kind of filming standpoint. That was an epic movie. It was like a huge blockbuster kind of like thing that came out, and that's why they were like, we're not cutting anything. It was 3 hours and 40 minutes long, and we're not cutting a thing. So, but yeah, I mean, super good movie. Definitely encourage people to see it. And it was kind of that first depiction of the Exodus in many ways. Well, obviously, as we think about just themes throughout the movies, we want to kind of even help people as they're starting to hear from our sermon series again in Exodus. What are some theological themes that you guys see running maybe in your movies and how they kind of run in parallel even to the narrative in Exodus?
One thing that happens in this movie is this movie really excels in the emotional frustration of getting the information from God and then experiencing all the plagues. A lot of times movies go, okay, now we have this plague. And there's like, oh, a little bit of reaction. Now we have this plague. Oh, reaction. Like you see the pain, the frustration on both sides. For example, if you think of the timeline of Moses, he lived probably up until he was about 40 in Egypt. And so when it comes to the scenes where a lot of the Egyptians are in pain, you see him lamenting, literally yelling out to an empty sky, like, is this enough? Have you had enough, God? Like, can't we do like half the plagues? And that's even something we've kind of talked about as a staff is like, when we read Psalms, we just see a lot of laments to God, but then an affirmation of trust and faith. But I thought about that because you think, Moses would have known a lot of these people, and especially when a lot of their firstborn died, he'd just kind of go up and say, okay, and it's about time. He very heavily weighs like, you all lost your children.
Right.
The Israelite children did not. But when he delivers that line, I think Christian Bale delivers that very well. So there's a lot of lament. And there's even an interesting kind of theological theme of, so he has the burning bush scene, which I think a lot of people didn't like the movie, the way they handled it. We can get into that if we want later. But he immediately goes, okay, so I'm the deliverer. I'm going to go start a guerrilla warfare and God is empowering me. Okay. And I thought that was actually brilliant because he was kind of like, okay, God, what do you want me to do? But then there's no answer from God. And so he just goes out and starts doing this. And then eventually when God does finally approach him, God's like, are you done yet? Yeah. Like, now watch me go. And then you realize there's this whole theme of Ridley Scott kind of pointing, this is really about God versus God with a capital G. Okay. Pharaoh God. And they said, now watch me go. I'm going to show you who's boss. And you can kind of trying to do things in your own strength. So I thought that was really interesting.
So it fleshes out a little bit more of kind of even the back and forth of, hey, who's kind of in the driver's seat spiritually? It's like Moses wants to do his own thing for a little while. And then he realizes he has to submit to God, which isn't really, it's clear in the burning bush scene in the book of Exodus, but it's kind of just in one tidy paragraph where it's like, who's going to speak for me? How do I do this? I can't lead these people. And then God provides those answers, but it sounds like it was more of a process.
And I think that's really smart. This is where I think a good filmmaker really thought through, said, well, if Moses had been a good leader, right? And he had, like, we read about that, he had great wisdom and he had a lot of great leader training, being in Egypt, he would say, I'm going to use my skills. Yeah. So how do you then do that? And I think that was really underlined. I think a lot of people when they saw the movie, they're like, "Well, that's not right. That's not how it was. That's not how I saw it on the flannel graph when I was a kid." Right. That's one thing actually Jessica and I really appreciated. She said, like, it's really too bad that Christians don't at least want to watch more of these movies because we seem to get so frustrated on it. I don't think it happened like that.
Yeah. Christians are like the ultimate, like, the book is better than the movie kind of people, right?
The ultimate Harry Potter people. Yeah. Like, that's not what happens. Yeah.
The book's way better. Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
I felt that same tension actually on my side too with Ten Commandments movie. Charlton Heston is a tall, good-looking guy. He was raised in Egypt, obviously, so he's got lots of leadership skills and kind of commanding presence.
And can you even also just the way he says God is amazing. It's always like by the hand of God.
Yeah,
that's I was so jealous that you got that. To hear Heston talk.
I mean, he really is commanding though. I mean, the way he talks, everything about it, and it's interesting to see. Ike, as you're mentioning, just thinking about theologically how God works in people and using people. Yeah, I think sometimes he does it different ways. So sometimes he'll use people exactly where they're at in terms of like, oh, it makes sense. I'm going to utilize this person's natural abilities and their position. Oftentimes God does that. But then I think about, in Samuel with the choosing of King David. I mean, he was a short, ruddy guy. He didn't have, all these things kind of behind his name. So God does that as well. So I thought that was interesting as well, just thinking about how Moses could have kind of been a leader in any setting. And yet God chose him to do a very specific thing for the Israelites. Bryan, how about you? Anything that kind of stuck out to you as far as just theological themes?
One of the big themes, or one of the big questions, I guess, that this movie asks is kind of how do you view yourself, or where do you get your sense of identity from? And so something that I thought was interesting about this movie is they do kind of play it a little bit. Like, they tell the story of Exodus. I think they do a pretty good job. But they do kind of like the Disney fairy tale thing a little bit, where they kind of try to walk both lines, which is really interesting. So Val Kilmer, he plays Moses, but he also plays the voice of God, and he does like a little different inflection there. But I think they kind of leave that door open for interpretation. So it's kind of like, hey, Christians, have your go at it. But you can kind of feel that they were going for like, we don't want to water down the message too much, but we want to leave some secular things there for people. So they do kind of lean into the identity thing, going with Moses being Moses, and also is it just Val Kilmer talking to himself? But like you said, the big question here is, where do you get your sense of identity? So Pharaoh Ramesses, he keeps going back to, I am the morning and the evening star. I think he says that like 9 times in the movie. Like, I am this God. He very early on, when he gets in trouble with his dad says, you could ruin this whole nation. He says, you could be the weak link. And that kind of sticks with him throughout the entire movie. You see this big fear in him. He doesn't want to be the one to bring the kingdom crumbling down. And so they kind of use that as the motivation for why Ramesses is so stubborn. Moses keeps coming back to him and says, will you please let my people go? Let my people go. Like, your stubbornness is the reason these plagues keep happening. And you see him in the movie, it shows Ramesses just keeps going back. He's like, I can't be the one who lets this kingdom just topple. I can't be what my father thought I was going to be. I can't be this failure that I was projected to be. And at the very end, it shows that his stubbornness actually led to that. Like, he's the movie shows it as he's the reason why everything fell apart. And so we have that version of Ramesses, this guy who, like, which also really cool is that he's not portrayed as just this one-dimensional villain the entire time. In a lot of ways, he's more mature than Moses. In a lot of ways, he's the one who wants to be a good leader, a good ruler, a good father. Where Moses is kind of shown as like kind of a joker, kind of just like a like a whatever kid in the beginning. It's not until later on. And so the big turning point for Moses, after he kills the Egyptian, he runs away. He kills the Egyptian because he sees the horrors of slavery for the first time. You could tell it's always in the background, which is really cool in the movie. It's always in the background. And then once he kind of meets his brother and sister and he realizes that he's a Hebrew, everything kind of gets pushed to the foreground a little bit. And so the viewer sees the slaves now for the first time even more. That drives him into the desert, and he meets Jethro, and that brings the big song, I think it's called Heaven's Eyes.
Here we go. So, sing it. Go ahead. 5, 6, 7, 8.
Basically, what happens, I won't bring that harm on our listeners. But he's kind of like Jethro, the high priest, tries to accept him, and he's like, I'm not worthy of anything. And so then he goes into this song, and he says, how can you see what your life is worth, or where your value lies? You must look at your life through heaven's eyes. And one more time, he says, how do you measure the worth of a man? The answer will come to him who tries to look at his life through heaven's eyes. And so it's this idea of, you can't just look at your own past mistakes. You can't look at what other people have said about you. It's, what does God say about you? What is God's view for you? What is God's plan for you? And that's where things really shift for Moses, where Ramesses keeps looking to the past, keeps looking to his dad and these burdens placed upon him, where Moses still has a really, really hard journey, but he's like, this is what God said I am. This is what God told me to do. And same thing, when the plagues happen, you can see Moses is distraught. He's really sad, but he keeps going back to, like, hey, God told me to do this. I'm going to listen. Yeah. Like, this is who I am now. And you see this big shift.
That's cool that they got that right, in a sense. I think about the way that, like, you know, their counterpart Disney would have handled that, or have traditionally handled it. It's not so much like, even don't worry about what other people think about you. Like, what do you think about you?
Right.
You know, that's kind of Disney's message a little bit. It's like you have all that you need inside you. You can kind of move forward with that. But yeah, it's good to hear that the writers of Prince of Egypt got that part right. There was a similar pivot for me in Ten Commandments. I think about that verse, Ezekiel 36:26. Where God says, "I'll give you a new heart and put a new spirit in you," and that's what it really felt like when Moses kind of encountered God in the burning bush. In my movie, there was this shift of my old self was dead, and kind of Moses came back down from the mountain or from the burning bush, and had an encounter with Yahweh. And his hair was gray. All of a sudden, he had a beard. It was kind of weird. Yeah. Katie was watching with me, and she just starts laughing because it's like he literally just like he grows hair and it's gray like in 2 scenes.
It's like the Santa Claus moment.
But
yeah, even it's very much like the Tim Allen Santa Claus.
It is really interesting though. Even in my movie, whenever Moses finds himself, he gets a beard.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, like having a beard.
Happens here too. Yeah, he does. Yeah,
it like means that you've like been thoughtful or like. So I think that heart change part was probably the biggest shift throughout my movie. I think that and actually the theme of slavery actually was interesting too, because that was especially for a 1956 movie, they pushed that really hard, as far as like that was kind of his moral compass to start with. Like he was kind of anti-slavery. That kind of got him starting thinking about what does it mean if I were to kind of deviate from kind of the Egyptian culture a little bit. And it was his kind of like hatred for slavery. He was like, I can't believe people do this. And so he was out there in the mud pits and just looking at folks and how they were working and being treated. But it was still, even that kind of like virtue kind of waving was more about the slavery thing personally. But then when he had when Moses had the interaction at the burning bush, it was all about like, what does God want from me? And like God is setting kind of the moral tone from now on. So I thought that was actually really interesting. That shift of what we see in justification when we are saved as Christians, I think they kind of got that right in my movie.
I'm just curious, how was God portrayed quickly in your guys' movies? Was he kind of this distant thing? Did they kind of apologize for the plagues? What did they do with God in your movies?
So God was portrayed as a kid. And it was really interesting. So you have
as an actual child,
as an actual like 11-year-old kid.
Was he bald? I feel like God is normally bald in these movies.
It's like it's like Avatar: The Airbender
really
kind of vibe.
Cut. Yeah, it was really clean. It was really clean cut.
Okay.
But also, interestingly enough, he looked extremely similar to Moses' own son he left behind.
Interesting.
So there's a lot of interesting ideas. I think it's kind of appealing to the secular base. So sometimes people would be watching Moses talk to God, like, and they would see that he was like by himself. But when you see Moses, he's talking to a kid who actually is God.
Can everybody else see him? See the kid?
No.
Oh, okay.
No,
so he's like an imaginary child.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But later they kind of show. It seemed they have a couple scenes later when they're finally delivered, like the kid's walking by Moses, and it seems more. You can just go by the tone. It feels like they're trying to say like he really is there.
Yeah.
Moses is just the only one who's been given the ability to see him. Kind of. But they do make God as the kid a little bit impatient and frustrated. He's like, well, I'm going to give him another plague. And like, I'm gonna show him who's God. There's a little bit of that. There's one scene where it was just a little bit,
a little cringy,
like it's childish, like God is childish,
a little bit childish. And so, but then again, though, I was kind of just put on the helmet of Ridley Scott. It felt more of like a lament, more than saying that God is like this. That he was more just that this is how Moses is feeling God is, and the frustrations and. So I didn't feel like he was trying to have a go at God or trying to put people down the wrong way. It was more of a feeling of, I don't understand, this is how it feels like God is sometimes. And so you maybe have to have I want to say a thicker skin, but through that lens, I kind of appreciated the movie.
Interesting. Yeah, for my movie, God was he was like in the scenes like maybe 2 or 3 times. Burning bush, there was this moment where I think towards the end of the movie when Moses is standing there trying to part the Red Sea, and he kind of like calls out to God, and he kind of answers him a little bit. So it's very quick, and they kind of weave in and out too. There's a narrative kind of voice over the whole movie. So in some ways, it's kind of like very old fashioned in that way. to kind of connect the dots. So it's kind of unclear, is that God's voice kind of narrating the whole story, or is it just the narrator? Sometimes they use actual scripture, sometimes they kind of just fill stuff in. So not very present. In some ways, he's kind of treated as this kind of like myth or like legend, like, oh, like we know about your God, and Moses has access to him, but that's about it.
It's interesting. So it sounds like Prince of Egypt probably has the most, I don't know, maybe faithful, I guess, representation of a God, which is interesting, because I feel like this movie probably wasn't made by a believing Christian or a believing Jew, I think, but it feels like it was made by someone who had a great respect for it. So like, every time he talks about God is going to do these terrible things, he calls them his wonders, which I think is really interesting. Like, so it's like, you're going to see my wonders, and then the plagues come, and so it just shows like, hey, this is really what happened, but they don't like kind of apologize for it, and they don't place it like, they don't put this overly comfy like, don't worry kids, God is actually really loving. It's like, God brought these terrible things, but then it shows why it happened. So
one thing that I thought was interesting was the use of the characters in all three of our movies. So Ramses, first of all, just to be clear, it's not clear in the Bible that Ramses is the Pharaoh who Moses is interacting with the whole time, and also it's definitely not the case probably that they were brothers. Right. So it's interesting that in the Ten Commandments, and probably kind of spurred onto your guys' movies, that they went that route. It definitely adds a layer of like interest to the relationship, the dynamic.
It's good storytelling.
For there to be some kind of history back in the background. But obviously, just to be clear, in Scripture, Ramses and Moses are not like half brothers. They're not related. There's definitely the sense that Moses was in the kind of the royal family at some level, but he's not necessarily even, I mean, it could be years later, totally different family even, who was in charge. Is that right for yours as well?
Well, one thing I was just going to say was, even in light of Chris's sermon last week, how everything we see, all the nuances are kind of a slap in the face to the claim that Pharaoh is God. I can imagine them not being close at all, and Moses kind of being a lower guy, and whoever was going to become Pharaoh one day, basically was kind of looked down on him, like I'm the quarterback, you're the offensive lineman that can't block, like in the Super Bowl we saw,
like the Chiefs had this past.
But that would make sense though, because it wouldn't be like this. We like to imagine this struggle of like, oh brother, why?
Right.
But really, it makes sense more of like, you're just him.
Yeah, it was definitely more obvious in my movie because this is obviously 1950s, and so they used actually a lot of brown face kind of situation where like lots of white people were cast as Middle Eastern folks in Egypt and all that stuff. So it was interesting to see their casting choices. I mean, they used a lot of beautiful people, first of all, just people who are like obviously belonged in movies. Not a lot of, I mean, Joshua and his love interest are very much like very glamorous looking, and even though that probably wasn't the case. So
it's so funny hearing Sandra Bullock say, "You'll have it." I was like, "Okay, Sandra, why don't you go save somebody in Miss Congeniality?" Right?
Was she in Prince of Egypt?
Yeah, she plays Miriam.
What if she wasn't? He was just talking about Sandra Bullock.
You know, Bryan, I've been a little uncomfortable how much you talk about Sandra Bullock.
Just working it every time. All right, well, hey, last question. Let's give some sense of, would you guys recommend this movie to other people? Like maybe out of like 5 stars, what would you say as far as your movie goes?
I would say 4 stars.
Wow.
Absolutely.
4 stars.
Because really, coming from who they are and what they're making, like, and what they try to do with the character and the tensions, they did a great job. I would say the only reason I wouldn't give it more would be, number one, lack of the original content, not being tied to that. And number 2, there's a couple of times I feel like he was copy and paste from Gladiator. Okay. But really, there's a lot of really wonderful connections and plots he brings together from a very large storyline. Yeah. I thought he did a great job.
So Exodus of Gods and Men, 4 out of 5 stars. Gods and Kings.
I would say 4 out of 5, yeah.
That's amazing.
Are you generally like a more favorable reviewer?
Do you generally have really bad taste?
No, like,
did you watch your movie?
It's incredibly well acted.
Yeah.
The visuals, the directing, the scenes, the sets, like it's really well done. I truly believe that people's biggest issues with it are preference.
How about you, Bryan? What would you give yours?
Oh yeah, that's great. Probably like a 4.5.
Okay.
Yeah. It's really good. I wish it was a little bit longer. I wish they had a chance to flesh things out a little bit more. Yeah. But real quick, like if you haven't seen it, the animation is like super. It's gorgeous, man. It's amazing. Yeah. This is like late 90s. It's cinematic for sure. If you haven't seen it, you should totally watch this movie. Yeah. Watch it with your kids. It's a great movie.
That's cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I was going to give my movie 4 to 5 stars thinking that I was generous, but you saying 4 to 5 for your movie. Makes me kind of feel like I should say 5 out of 5 for mine.
Well, I think for its time.
Yeah, it's pretty great. I mean, I think that for sure, I'll say 5 out of 5. It's not a perfect movie, but it's definitely, for its time, a great movie. Everyone should see it. I think to your point, Bryan, the length of the movie, it really allows for a lot of story to be told.
Right.
This superfluous stuff too, as far as the love interest and kind of silly things, but overall, you really get a sense of the character arc of Moses, kind of moving from A to B, and so it's really cool in that way. Also, just if you're a movie nerd, like it's really cool just to see these large scale epics being done in this way. So yeah, definitely go see that movie, and then obviously definitely come on Sunday mornings and watch Pastor Chris do his thing.
6 out of 5. Right?
Man, wouldn't that be great if we
5 out
could
of
have
5 for
him
Pastor
dress
Chris.
as Charlton Heston like Moses?
There's still time. We
I
could
think
probably
he could
do
pull
it.
it off.
Yeah.
We
should interrupt his sermon actually from the back, like holding the 10 Commandments, just walking it out.
I'll just walk up with a big staff and
We
lay
should
that.
definitely do that. That would be helpful for everybody,
He's got the
especially the
beard now,
online
yeah.
folks. Yeah, what is happening right now? So we're back at it. Encourage you guys to check out our sermon series. Catch up if you haven't yet. Our Exodus series, and thanks for listening today. Thanks, guys, for being here. Bryan,
Pleasure.
Ike.
Thanks, Steven.
All right, well, we're out of time, but thanks for joining us for our podcast, Footnotes. Be sure to subscribe, and we'd also appreciate you sharing this resource with others, and even leaving us a favorable review if you feel so inclined. So until next time, Foothill, peace be with you.
That's a good one.